Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. My name is Uzair, and joining me today is Usama Nini. He is one of the co-founders of Qureos, a startup that is based out of Pakistan and Dubai, going a lot and has been doing a lot of very interesting and fascinating stuff on the talent and skilling side. I was, before I started recording this podcast, was just doing some background research, and it took me back to my college days when career fairs used to be this like really tense moment, right? You go into a big hall and sort of have to hand in your resume, and the resume has to be printed a certain way, and you have to dress up a certain way. But Curious recently just digitized career fairs, working with and collaborating with a bunch of leading institutions of Pakistan. So really disrupting the way in which talent interacts with those that are seeking talent, and how do you skill yourself? How do you find mentors? How do you learn new skills that perhaps you need to excel and excel at your career or enter a new career? We'll find out all about that. But first, Usama, thank you for taking out the time, and I'm really glad that we could take out, have this conversation, because as I've said in my other podcast recently, a lot of the conversation has been focused on the economy in Pakistan, what's going on with debt, blah, blah, blah. But these are the most fun conversations I have with founders and startups and entrepreneurs, because it shows a different side of what's going on in the economy. It's not all doom and gloom. So thank you for helping us get out of the doom and gloom scenario. And I want to begin this conversation with help us understand what Curious is, how did it come about, and what's the vision and mission of the startup that you and others have founded.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hosting me here, Uzair. About Curious, right? So Curious is trying to solve for a very, very simple problem that has been there for multiple decades, if not more. The problem is super simple. What is it that we're trying to solve for? Is the transition from campus to workplace. That's basically the niche that we're essentially trying to solve for. But when you look at this it's a much bigger problem within this, and the hows differ in the kind of ways that everyone has been trying to solve for this problem. But if you look at it very in a very surgical manner, the problem is about two very simple things, which is access and relevance on both sides, which is students or candidates, if you want to call them. On the other side, it's the employers, right? And it's a very simple problem. After telling you a little about the access and the relevance problem, I would want to connect it back to my story. But I mean, when you talk about the access, it's about how does the biggest problem that a student has is, think of a student who has always had a shelter of their parents for most of their time, went to their universities, choosing the university that they want to go to. And once they go there, they're usually coupled with some of their really good friends or people, or an entire ecosystem that is solving for them to essentially excel at that particular institution. But when you go beyond that institution, this is the first time you're losing all of that particular shelter and the support system that you previously had. And what is it about? Your best friends become your competitors for the same jobs that you're looking for, and all of a sudden you don't have some of the very important skills or tools that you would need to essentially succeed in the transition. So we want to be that support system. And what that support system requires is a merit of simple stuff that, hey, person X, you're looking for something of this sort. How about I connect you to the right people and connect you to the right audience altogether? And that would be employers, but at the same time, mentors. So at Curious, we have three different products within this. We have what we call helping students to connect with the right people, which is our mentors. We have more than 500 mentors from companies like Microsoft, PayPal, Google, Amazon, all across the world, that are open to give their feedback, their idea of how to solve a particular problem, explore careers, solve a particular problem, whatever they're facing. So that's one. The second thing is, not everyone has had an experience to go through internships or job experiences. Now, how do I sort of solve for that particular problem? Is, how about you complete projects on Curious, which are industry backwards, created by these mentors, created by these companies who are essentially out there trying to solve for this particular problem, and you are essentially helping and showcasing what you're essentially can do. So that is more of building a portfolio sort of a problem. And once you've had both of these things, is the last thing that I'm trying to solve for is who should I connect with? So based on your profile and the algorithmic match, we match you to the right employer. So it's not about spraying and praying and you're applying to hundreds of job opportunities, but rather you are focusing on some of the targeted ones which are the most relevant for you. So that's on the candidate side. But on the employer side, we have another suite of product that essentially allows you to get access of this talent altogether, which is talent from different backgrounds. So an employer sitting in Dubai would have access to talent all across the Middle Eastern region, and Pakistan as well. But not only having that access, but also relevance. So I don't want to put out a job posting and get hundreds of candidates, people who are not even relevant to the job posting altogether. But how can I solve for that particular problem? So relevance and access is the major key that Curious is trying to solve for altogether. And where did this even start from? Is if you talk about it, a very key start before this global. I'm still hesitant to say that we are really in recession or not, but I mean, right before this,
Almost there.
almost
Almost there.
there. But almost somewhere around mid 2022, there was a key stat that came out which is within the US. I mean, the best stats you can get out of is from the US as an economy. There are more jobs available out there than the talent that is available. And this is a very stark sort of a stat, right? I mean, how is it possible that there's an unemployment rate, but there are jobs available, but people are not being placed? And the simple problem is, a lot of the times I've heard the simple phenomena of there's not enough talent, and the answer to that question from my side is it's not lack of talent, it's lack of talent optimization altogether, which is a problem statement, and that is essentially what Curious is trying to solve for.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point in the sense that, um, we in especially in like STEM fields, highly technical fields, etc. Like I was reading this article last week about how in Ohio, Intel is building up a new manufacturing facility, right? And the unions are saying that this is the best time to be part of a union because there just is not a lot of, welders and electricians and plumbers and all of that. And they're having a very difficult time because of this friction in the marketplace to bring in other electricians, et cetera, from outside into the region in Ohio where this facility is being built. And they're having to use now finally technology, right, to get rid of that friction, but then also at the same time go into high schools and middle schools to engage with young students to say, look, just a software engineer is not the only path for you to have a great career. An electrician makes a lot of money in America, especially a union-backed electrician who's working at a facility like Intel, right? It's a good paying, well-respected job. So we're seeing a lot of that phenomenon, as you said, still in the United States after the pandemic and all over the world. I want to talk about the sort of broader Middle East experience and the growth in Pakistan and elsewhere that you've experienced. Because the headline when I read out of Pakistan or India or Bangladesh, right, is that, oh, the government opened up a job for something and 100,000 people applied. Youth unemployment is constantly talked about. And again, to me, that's a bit of a friction point, right? It's an allocation and relevance issue that's there. What has been the growth trajectory like for you as a startup? And what have been some of the lessons that you've learned as you sort of tried to scale in this marketplace, given the youth bulge, given the need for jobs, but also given that the friction points are also like much more significant and stark in these markets, primarily because of geographic sort of like diversity?
Yep. Very fair question. So, I mean, as a Middle Eastern, I'll talk about the Middle Eastern and Pakistan altogether. But I mean, if you think about the opportunities are limitless in this region, right? I mean, even if you make a difference of the Middle Eastern or more popular Middle Eastern countries like UAE and Saudi, they have a whole lot of opportunities all across. So I mean, the opportunities are there. So people getting recruited from all across the world are coming there. But at the same time, when you talk about Pakistan, there are different segments within which the opportunities are limitless altogether. Some opportunities are for job opportunities itself, but the other opportunities with every crisis, there is an opportunity to build something even bigger and better. So I'm sure there are a lot of opportunities coming up. And in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of major startups coming out of the Pakistani scene, which hasn't been the case as well previously. So to solve for that, the simple answer is that one thing that you just mentioned, 100,000 people applying to a particular job opening. If all 100,000 of them are expecting that someone on the other end is going to be reviewing all 100,000 of them, is definitely not going to be true, no matter what. So the real answer to this problem is that I feel like there is, and this is my personal understanding, that there is some sort of a desperation that is kicking in, hearing all the negativity around when I'm talking about Pakistan. But that's not really true, right? There are still more than 230 million people that need to be fed at the end of the day. These are this 230 million people who are not on one day just going to get up and leave the country, right? I mean, the country still needs to learn to function altogether. And if the country is going to function, it's going to be these disruptions that are going to be solving the problem altogether. So in my opinion, it's really about if the talent can really understand what is it that they are essentially looking for, what is the niche that they're creating for themselves, and be more targeted. And that is actually going to help the employers on the other side as well. So I think this is very, very much important for these talent to really realize what are they essentially looking for, and creating their own niche and actually specializing on something and providing that as a produce of a product altogether, rather than spraying and praying and hoping that something is going to solve for their problem by applying to hundreds and thousands of jobs.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, right? And as I said at the onset, I was reading about the digital career fairs, et cetera, that you all have done in partnership with institutions. We often hear in the Pakistani case, but it's true across the world that big institutions have inertia, right? They're not that keen to disrupt themselves, disrupt the old ways of doing business. And career fair is as old as it can be in terms of how things work in an educational institution. What was that experience like? And what was the takeaway from doing something like that, both on the university and student side, but more importantly on the employer side, right? Because traditionally employers also use that fair as a means to sort of recruit highly, capable talent into their organization. So when you digitize that process, and I think if I remember my figure correctly, like in under 4 seconds, you were matching people up. Tell us a bit about how that worked and what was the feedback that you got on all sides of the stakeholders here.
Oh, that was an exciting journey. I mean, kudos to our team for pulling this off. But I mean, kudos to all the stakeholders that took part, right? I mean, the first question when someone came up in the team and was like, let's make it happen. We were, if I am quoting myself exactly, we were, I think, 74 hours away from the event actually taking place in the first career fair
Wow.
that we were actually going to. And sitting in front of those decision makers in the institution, and they were like, how will you make it happen in the next 74 hours? It's pretty much impossible. And you were like, let us give it a try, and we'll show you how this happens. And kudos to them to actually take a bet on us, and actually form this partnership. A lot of the older mindsets would have probably said that, hey, let's take it up next year. But I mean, they did take a bet, and I mean, it was a ripple effect all over right after. So I mean, the process was super simple from our side. We had employers coming on board as part of the partnership from those institutions, and the process was super simple. The idea behind it was the problem within the career fair. So as a student, when I look back at my own self, I went to these career fairs, and at some point it started feeling a little pointless altogether. And why was that? Because I mean, everyone there, all my peers are there to sell themselves as and show what exactly what they are essentially there to offer to the organization. And organizations are there for the same. So it was more of a sales and marketing sort of an activity altogether.
It's like speed
And
dating basically for a job.
exactly. Exactly. And I'm not really getting value out of it, right? Why should I choose this company over that company? I'm not getting enough time. I'm worried about is how can I get to, let's say, 100 companies there, and try and sprint pray as many of them as much as possible. So I mean, that is probably the not the best way to go about doing things. So what we essentially decided to do was that, hey, let's take away that urge of getting to 100 or away from those students, right? Let's focus on real networking, real value solving. So the answer was simple. Hey, if you have come on board and if you have set up your profile on Curious, and if you have applied to at least one role through that particular QR code that was put on each booth, then you, based on your experience and your program and your year of graduation, you will be recommended to other opportunities with from the other 99 companies that are on there. So it makes it super, super simple. You don't have to worry about being connected to those. So it's so what actually started happening was students spent a lot more time in actually really building relationships. Employers loved it because now they don't have to take stacks of paper and actually look through them and slice and dice them in different ways.
Because
They
you're
actually
using technology on the back end to match
exactly.
them with the right stuff.
And they can now slice and dice. They can see who is graduating this year, who from what program across different schools. So this is really, really important data for employers. So at the end of the day, we and the outcome that was actually thought of was efficiency within the entire process, more connectivity between employers and students. And while both of them loved this solution, the party that was the most beneficial out of this was the school institution itself. And we didn't really think about it previously, but I mean, after the event, what we realized was that we were sitting on such a huge database of not only students interested in what careers altogether, because we could map what industries are students of particular year interested in, but also which program is creating students in a particular to go in a particular direction. And the universities were super confused that why are students preferring one over the other. On top of it, the most exciting piece was at some cases, and I would say some, it was not the best placement of the sponsors altogether on the day. What we could see is that what was expected outcome of the footfall for that particular location, for that particular sponsor or that employer, turned out to be very different, and the footfall on this other corner was a lot more. And now we can also help schools plan their career fairs even better. So I mean, it's a win-win situation altogether.
That's amazing, and I hope that that continues to scale up. And I'm guessing the success will make other institutions partner up on something like this as well. In terms of growth of your startup, obviously, as we talked about, the world is near, if not already, in a recession. Money's gotten a bit more expensive around the world. In the US, we've had just this past week alone, right? Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, all sorts of stuff that basically, on the macro side, the Fed popping the bubble by raising rates. Obviously the Middle East is a very different situation because of the commodity boom and things like that. I was just in Dubai as well, and you could see that there is some level of insulation there, not a lot, but Pakistan is a bit different. What are your goals as an organization in the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months in terms of growth, and where you're going to invest and how you're going to sort of achieve the next round of scaling? Help us understand a bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, the world is going through a lot of pain right now, but as we said and curious, we are rather always looking at the positives. So we see this as one of the biggest opportunities in a decade for ourselves. What we are going through right now, we are looking at unfortunately the biggest layoffs in the last couple of years. We are seeing a huge talent pool that is coming out that prefers remote, because remember, these guys graduated or were in school when we were going through the COVID period. So we are seeing this as a huge opportunity altogether, and I'll tell you why. Because I mean, if you think about it, there is going to be recession every 10 years as predicted, right? So there's going to be this time, but during this time what we're seeing is a huge talent pool that is out there available and actually wanting to either upskill themselves or want to be available for the job market. And a product like ourselves, if we can get to as much talent as possible and sort of make them come under a certain umbrella and slice and dice them and actually recommend them the right place, we are sitting on a gold mine for the next couple of years to come. Because now it's not only about what we can grow towards, but we are actually looking at all the real pain points that these students or early in career are going toward through, and how can we solve for their problems, not only through job recommendations, but also through upskilling them into different pieces. So I think the talent aggregation today, we are north of 250,000 talent base that is within our talent pool today. Mind you, when we started, or when we were at our pre-seed stage a little over a year ago, we were at somewhere around 10,000.
Wow.
So it's been a journey. If I were to say, almost 25 times in almost a year. So given next year, and I'm sure we can hit this more than 1 million now. So we are sitting on a very rich talent pool to not only solve for the very basic problem of jobs optimization, but also for learning optimization going forward.
And then I think again, from an employer perspective, right? Like in a downturn, there are two types of companies. One that kind of want to optimize their own size. We're seeing this at Meta, for example, another 10,000 laid off. But there are a lot of them that, are have been much more conservative and prudent in how they've sort of sought talent. And we see a lot even in the United States. And I've been reading stories about how they're hiring more now, right? Because all of a sudden, the technology person graduate coming out with a computer science degree who would have wanted to go into Google or Meta or Twitter or other Silicon Valley startups, they overhired, they're rationalizing. But then you have companies like GM, Ford, JP Morgan, etc., who are like, hey, we actually need technology talent and we're in a much better position now. And from your perspective, I think that's also awesome in the sense that if you can help them optimize to find the right talent that's entering the job market or coming out and has upskilled themselves, it's an amazing opportunity for them as well, because they were struggling over the last few years in the tech boom period to find that capable talent. And now there's a lot of it out there. So
For
I
sure.
think,
And the talent is also realizing, right? Talent is also evolving. So it doesn't mean that someone who worked 1 year in Meta, just because someone told them that this is a great company to work at, and they believed it to be. It could be that they're not built for those sort of companies. I mean, we need to look at our own selves, and we are constantly evolving. So when we talk about our own optimizations or talent matching and optimization, it actually happens not only through the background or professional background or the educational background, but rather on the cultural background and the cultural piece and what the person has actually done. So once we are taking in all of these data points, the optimization becomes a lot more rich altogether.
yeah, I think that's a very important point, which is a great pivot into, me wanting to ask you a bit about your own journey. And I'll start that conversation to your point on my own experience, right? As you said that I went to college in 2007, thinking that I want to go into the investment banking field, get into Boston at Bentley University. I'm wearing their hoodie right now, in fact. And I was like, I want to be an investment banker. They had a wonderful trading room and all of that. 2008 financial crisis happens and there are no investment banking jobs. But then on top of it, just you talked about cultural fit. As I learned more about the investment banking industry and talked to people, professors, alumni, etc., kind of realized that that wasn't the place for me, right? And I wanted to go in a different direction with my career. I think that's very important. And I think that learning has to happen for young adults when you're 18, 19, 20, learning a bit more about yourself, exploring different pathways. It's very important that you don't stick to something that you perhaps thought that was optimal for you, unless there's some professions where you have to. If you're becoming a doctor, it needs 5 years of work to be able to get there. But in a lot of other fields, it doesn't. So tell us a bit about your own journey in your own career and your own journey as an entrepreneur, and how did you end up being in the place that you are, and what are some things you picked up along the way that perhaps younger listeners here are like, what can we learn from you, and things to take care of as you think about your own career?
For sure. I mean, me and my co-founders, so my other co-founders, Alex, who is Swedish Romanian, and Merad, who is Persian American, from completely different geographical backgrounds, completely different age groups, usually joke around. So both of them are a product of mentorship, and whatever they have become is part of what they have essentially gotten from their mentors. But I am a product of lack of mentorship altogether. And why I say that is because I had to experiment a lot of things to figure out what I really wanted to do. And I mean, my journey is super simple. I've been born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan, moved to Canada to go to school there. Still know that that moving to Canada was not part of the merit altogether. It was rather a privilege that I was born with, which is some sort of a guilt that I live with altogether. And there was a guilt that was sort of seeded at that point that hey, one day I need to somewhat give back this privilege and sort of make this world a better place in some way or the other. I mean, it's not like I'm going to go and achieve bigger things, but I mean, if I can somewhat try and make a change from in whatever way I can. So the answer was super simple. In one way or the other, I need to give back to the society where I was from. So I mean, moved to Canada, started off my educational studies abroad, but what I really was pushed towards was, hey, I mean, this is how we've been brought up. If you are good at numbers, how about you go and do accounting and go to the CA route
CA or
and
ACCA.
CA or ACCA route, and you're going to be set for life. And I was like, okay, I'm good with numbers. Let's do accounting, and I mean, getting all of those A's and stuff. It was exciting as it gets, right? I mean, you think this is going to be the life, but I was lucky enough, again, a privilege, which was getting the first intern after my first year of schooling, and I realized I was in the audit and assurance route, and I was like, hey, I really don't want to do this. Then the
I
second
can
piece
I can relate to that. Yeah, exactly. It's a light bulb moment, right? You're like, oh crap, like I may be good at this, but do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? Hell no.
the answer was no, always no. And for me, the barometer was, I looked at my manager, who was in some cases 3 or 5 years older than where I was. And I was like, do I really want to be doing what he or she is doing from 5 years from now? And the answer was always no. So that's why I had to change my route. Second year comes in, like that. I was not the only one who got this realization. I moved towards the FP&A route because that is the most simple transition, financial planning analysis, and that is what I went towards. Realized, worked at one of the largest mining companies in Canada. Realized this is something I don't want to do again. So I was like, okay, how do I transition from here on? And then there was
Numbers clearly was not your calling.
was not really working. And this is when someone told me, they were like, maybe you should try the investments route. And I was like, okay, and let's give it a try. I went down the private equity and hedge fund finance sort of route. Actually was again lucky enough to get those. Though I will be honest, I liked what I was doing, but it was not self-fulfilling enough. And I was like, I don't want to be investing in people who are bringing the change. I want to be the one bringing the change. So that is when I decided that, hey, enough is enough. And startup scene was growing, luckily, in the Middle Eastern and Pakistani regions, which I was hearing about. I was like, let's try for some disruption. And that is when I joined a fintech startup in Canada only. Super early stage, uh, took hands-on. It was just a group of 11 people, 9 engineers and product people. Only the CEO and myself were the two people who were doing sales, HR, marketing, operations, you name it. Everything was basically both of us working towards, and that was the most exciting part, from at least for myself. I loved doing a lot of things, and trying to build a strategy around and then growing and hustling. But the answer was that at that startup, we were basically selling to one of the larger banks across the world, and the answer was, am I really wanting to help these rich people make more money, or do I really want to bring about a change that I had sort of promised myself a couple of years ago? And that is when I decided to join one of the mass mobility startups in the region, move to Dubai, somewhat make a soft landing before getting back to Pakistan, and essentially um, launched a couple of markets for them. So UAE, Jordan, Saudi saw an amazing startup growth journey. 10x growth in terms of valuation, reached IPO level. And then as soon as that announcement came out, that is around the time when I had also met my now co-founder Alex Ipio. He was leading the Middle Eastern unit for the business, and that is when he and Merad were already working on Qureos as a side project. Qureos, by the way, was never supposed to be a startup. The fun fact is, it
Interesting.
started as a passion project. And that is when Alex and Merad, Alex told me that, hey, there's this cool project that I'm working on along with Merad. Do you want to jump on board? Started working a little, and then we were like, hey, let's turn this into a startup. So the the accelerating journey of growing a startup in the Middle East was done, and I was like, let's focus more towards edtech, which is really closer to my heart, and I really think is going to be the most beneficial thing that you can do for this region to grow from into the next future, as we all expect or hear a lot of people talking about Pakistan being one of the bigger forces to come out of. But I mean, the problem is the same for almost all emerging economies. And then here I am, where I could not take the privilege to. The privilege was the reason I moved to the West, and that guilt brought me back. And in terms of helping, hopefully, a lot more people around me, and bringing back the experience, and hopefully with this as a journey, more people will be able to get the experience either of the West or be able to go to the West and get more learnings. But hopefully, most of us can come back and
Come
build our
back.
own country.
Yeah, and I think that it's thank you for sharing that. That's a really fascinating personal journey, right? And I think the fact that at a very early stage you were, as I was hearing you talk, that you had a recognition not only that you wanted to sort of make use of your privilege and sort of give back, which is very rare at that young age, but then also kind of knowing that what wasn't your calling, right? And I think a lot of times, especially in our culture, people are told to be doctors, engineers, lawyers, accountants, and that's what you do, and that's it. And they never really are given the mentorship, guidance, or the freedom intellectually to go and experiment, right? And I think we often hear people say 60% of Pakistan's population is under 30. They're the future. But I'm like, well, we need to empower them with critical thinking, give them the freedom to disrupt, give them the freedom to experiment, because if not them, then you lose another generation to stagnation, right? And that's what you can't have. And as you said, the entire region is that part of that story. India is part of that story. Bangladesh is part of that story. Sri Lanka, Iran, UAE, Saudi, etc., Jordan, even. Um, and I think one thing that I recall, and I don't know if you feel differently about this, was that I graduated college in 2010. And so a lot of my peers who went to school in Karachi and then went all over the world and studied, some studied in Pakistan as well. The definite route was, a cushy multinational type job, right? The second transition was going to startups, but not a lot did that. What I see now is the transition that says people want to be entrepreneurs, or they want to sort of have more of an impact. They're a lot more impact focused these days, which is a great thing to see that shift happening, right? Because people don't want to just go work for Engro. They're like, I want to work for a startup. I want to be at a high growth place, not only because it's financially potentially extremely lucrative if you hit it out of the park, but that's not the only driver. I think a lot of young adults that I talk to are actually going in for impact, right? They want to have that positive thing that you talked about, giving back. As you look back at your career over the years, and you've interacted with a lot of younger people, like what are, for somebody who's listening in right now, what are some like keys to success that they should think about and invest themselves and their time in, to succeed at a startup, or in fact go on and become an entrepreneur like yourself? Like what have you seen as like here are some things you should think about and do if you want to really excel here?
Hmm. Tough one, because I wouldn't consider myself successful as yet, but I mean, I can definitely share some of what I have sort of learned across the way. The answer is simple, right? And I do really understand why people in the past were not able to do things that they really wanted to do, mainly because it was an existential risk altogether. There was people were super scared because the it was the fear of the unknown. What is it that you would get if you failed while doing a startup, right? Working on your own startup. But today the world is very different. I mean, some success stories. I mean, some really good funding rounds in the past couple of years in Pakistan. The exit of Kareem in the region, that was an uplift altogether, right?
I think
Uh,
Kareem in Pakistan and Flipkart in India were like two huge seismic shifts that sort of, birthed an entire generation of would-be entrepreneurs.
Exactly, and this is where people who went through this journey, who we now call the Kareem Mafia, or everyone else who's been striving, they have a glimmer of hope, right? They're like, hey, if we are on the right track and if we build the right thing, and if we are actually creating an impact, we will definitely get to that point, or we will be rewarded. So I think people have more hope altogether, which is great. But at the end of it, I mean, don't don't just start something up because you want to A, raise big rounds, B, maybe have a lot of people talking about yourself. I mean, it's not an easy journey, right? Especially in these times, it's probably the worst times to do so, and to obviously be thinking of building something which is super hard. But at the same time, people who are going to be building right now with the right impact at heart will definitely be able to succeed, because now we are in a very unique and a very good point in the Pakistani ecosystem, as I would say, which is we have some success stories or some glimmer of success stories, which is great. People are seeing that this, if you have the right mindset, you can definitely achieve bigger things. But at the same time, all the people who came into the startup space only for this to be an exciting or the shiny thing to be doing will probably go away, and what you're going to be left with is going to be the real entrepreneurs who's going to be building for the right reasons and for the right impact altogether. And hopefully this is going to be a great journey, and this is going to be the birth of where Pakistani startups actually scale super fast. So I think I'm very optimistic altogether, and I think if people go down this journey altogether, I think this will be the super success story that people can follow.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you that this is when, if you look at sort of the last big wave of the really impactful global unicorns, right? A lot of them scaled in the global financial crisis. And I think this is again the same situation because now no one's going to cut you a check for $1 million, $2 million, $5 million just because you have a great presentation and a great sounding idea. You got to work hard on making the case on your financials, on your strategy, and really convince the investor on the other side that you're the right person or the team to back on and you have a fundamentally legit idea because free money isn't there anymore, right? And I think a lot of people have been talking about is like, oh, this era of free money is over, this ecosystem's done. I'm like, no, actually, the most impactful businesses over the next 10, 15, 20 years will be born in this downturn because that is going to only let the fittest survive. And that's the beauty, right? I think I often say on the podcast, I'm unashamedly a capitalist. And this is the beauty of capitalism, right? The incentive structure is now going to demand that only the best survive because money is expensive and the world is in a downturn. So I fully agree with you on that as well. Osama, this has been a wonderful conversation. And before I let you go, I always ask my guests, what are 2 or 3 books that you would recommend to the audience?
I'm smiling because I'm not an avid reader myself. And there's a particular reason why I don't read that much. One is that I believe that whatever the stories or books are rather a perspective of the author themselves, right? So I'm nothing against them, but the only way to cut out that perspective is by reading multiple books on the same topic altogether, which I haven't been able to sort of dedicate my time towards. But I'm more of an audio listener altogether. I do like to listen. One of the most exciting podcast that I've heard is Business Wars. So people who haven't heard it is should definitely try. But I mean, I'm more focused towards or very much excited about the politics and knowing what exactly is happening around the world. So I mean, from the global. So politics and finance, some sort of finance did stick with me. So I mean, if a simple habit that I have is reading through or browsing through morning newsletters from Seeking Alpha or Wall Street Journal. I think those are the best ones to keep up to date with whatever is happening. It's more of a narration.
I'm
But
partial to the Bloomberg newsletter, but the journal one is quite good as well.
that's what really helps me. But and the third and for the local landscape, I mean, again, not letting the bias creep in, I try to listen to as many different journalists or media outlets out there, so I can grasp the situation from different perspectives and not really create a bias. So that is my particular way of actually staying up to date or actually reading more towards things.
Yeah, no, that's the bias point is extremely important, right? I think especially in the downside of the algorithmic tech-based ecosystem of information is that the algorithms then reinforce your bias. So you actually have to be very conscious about how you're
Exactly.
searching for and finding information, because otherwise Twitter feed or other things will basically give more of what you read or more of what you like and follow, which sometimes means that you've created a bubble for yourself, that the technology then prevents you from sort of diversifying. And I think, again, that's a very good insight in the fact
It's
that,
very funny. I'll share one last thing over here. I mean, related to the topic of bias. I was speaking to one of my really good friends, who's a journalist, and he was talking about how, and they basically work for a global outlet, and what they essentially were saying that whatever we write these days about Pakistan, we have to put inflation, we have to put poverty or Islamists in our title or somewhere in our write up, even if it's not related to it, because this is what sells, and that is rather creating a bias altogether, right? I mean, why do we have to put those words in when we don't have to? And you have to cut through that noise and actually not look at the headlines and actually go into the nitty gritties of the topic and hear it from different people to really understand what the real truth is about. And I'm kudos to people who are doing podcasts now, like yourselves, who are actually helping the real narrative actually come out rather than the filtered version altogether.
yeah, no, I think it's a big downside, and I think it's going to get worse now with AI based, like, Chat GPT and others, because they're going to basically conversation based chat on AI is going to have a bias towards what's already on the internet. And if already, as you said, on the internet, you have to put certain keywords in to get higher rankings by leading publications, then Chat GPT is also going to over index on something like that. So it's a loop that has to be at some point broken. And I think we're seeing people catch up to it, right? I think particularly younger generation that is digitally native has sort of realized that. So we see now numbers shift onto YouTube and onto podcasting and onto other platforms, because they kind of get it that, these are bubbles that are being created and we need to be aware of it. But very, very important point. And I think, again, that's the downside of technology. All technologies have downsides, and we need to be wary of that. They're mostly on the upside. But again, thank you for your time today, and for sharing your journey, for sharing a bit about Qureos, and wish you and your team all the best. And you're doing amazing work, fulfilling a big gap in the market, that has having real impact, especially in a country like Pakistan. So wish you all the best, and hope you get to that million number as soon as possible in the shortest amount of time, because that's what's needed. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us over.